The great hall of the Galactic Assembly was silent. 10,000 representatives from 100 different species sat in their seats watching the figure at the center podium. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They were all waiting to hear something that had never been heard before in the history of the galaxy. Ambassador Thyron Voss stood alone in the light. He was tall and thin, with silver-blue skin that seemed to glow softly in the chamber's artificial sunlight. He had 4 arms, as all Velthari did, and he kept them folded close to his body. His large black eyes looked out at the crowd, and for the first time in his long career, those eyes held something like fear. The Velthari Confederation was old, 3,000 years old. When most of the species in this room were still learning to build fires, the Velthari had already mapped the stars. Their ships were beautiful things of crystal and light. Their weapons could turn asteroids to dust. For 30 centuries, they had been the peacekeepers of the galaxy, the wise elders who settled disputes and maintained order, but now they were dying. "Honored representatives," Thyron began, and his voice was barely a whisper. "I come before you today not as an ambassador, but as a beggar." A murmur ran through the crowd. The Velthari did not beg. They advised, they commanded, they judged, but they did not beg. Thyron raised one of his hands, and a holographic image appeared in the air above him. It showed a planet, green and blue, spinning peacefully in the void. Then the image changed. The planet was burning. Great clouds of black smoke covered its surface. Ships shaped like twisted insects swarmed around it like flies around a corpse. "This was Velnar 7, Thyron said, "home to 12 million of my people. The Kreth took it in 3 days. There were no survivors." He changed the image again. Another planet. Then another. Then another. Each one burning. Each one dead. 11 worlds in 8 months. Billions of lives lost. Our fleet has fought them at every turn. We have used every weapon we possess. Our admirals have tried every strategy they know. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked. "Nothing works. Nothing stops them. The Kreth consume everything in their path, and we cannot slow them down." The Kreth. Everyone in the chamber knew the name. They were ancient, older even than the Velthari. Insectoid creatures that moved in vast swarms across the galaxy, stripping worlds of all life before moving on to the next. They had been dormant for 8 centuries, sleeping in the dark spaces between stars. Now they were awake, and they were hungry. "We have fought alone for too long," Thyron continued. "Pride kept us from asking for help. We believed we could handle this threat as we have handled every threat before. We were wrong." He looked directly at a section of the assembly where a small group of beings sat apart from the others. "We ask the younger races for aid. We ask all who are willing. We ask the Terrans." Now the silence was broken. Voices rose from every corner of the chamber. Some were shocked, some were angry, some were laughing. The Terrans, humanity. They had only been among the stars for 500 years, a tiny fraction of galactic history. They were considered primitive, emotional, and dangerous. They still used projectile weapons, crude machines that threw pieces of metal at high speeds. They still fought wars among themselves. They were everything the civilized galaxy had moved beyond. And now, a Velthari was asking for their help. In the Terran section, a woman named Grace Porter sat quietly and watched. She was the human ambassador to the Galactic Assembly, a position that mostly involved being ignored and occasionally insulted. She was 50 years old, with short brown hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She had heard every joke about humanity. She had smiled through every lecture about their primitive ways. And now, she was watching the most powerful civilization in the galaxy admit that they needed help from the species they had mocked for centuries. She pressed a button on her communicator. "Get me a secure line to Earth. Priority 1. 6 hours later, and 12,000 light-years away, General Catherine Murphy sat in her office beneath the Rocky Mountains. The room was small and plain, with concrete walls and a single desk. Kate was 53 years old, with iron gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had been a soldier for 30 years, and her face showed every one of them. On her desk, a holographic display showed Ambassador Voss making his plea. Kate watched it 3 times. Then she called her staff together. Colonel Danny Reyes was the first to arrive. He was her second in command, a man of 40 with dark hair and a quick mind. Behind him came Admiral Patricia Vance, commander of the Terran First Fleet. Then came a dozen others, generals and admirals and intelligence officers, all of them wearing the gray uniforms of Earth's military. "You've all seen the transmission," Kate said. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "The Velthari are asking for help. Command wants our assessment." Danny laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The same Velthari who called us galactic toddlers at the last summit? The ones who said we should be kept in quarantine until we grew up?" "The same ones," Kate agreed. "Let them burn," said another voice. It was General Frank Howard, an old soldier with white hair and hard eyes. "They've treated us like animals since we first made contact. Why should we die for them?" Kate understood the feeling. She had felt it herself, many times, but she had also spent the last hour studying the tactical data from the Velthari front lines. She had seen what the Kreth could do. "Because if we don't stop them there, we'll have to stop them here," she said quietly. "The Kreth aren't going to be satisfied with Velthari space. They'll keep coming. They'll keep consuming. Eventually they'll reach Earth." The room was silent. "We can fight them on someone else's ground," Kate continued, "or we can wait until they're knocking on our door. I know which one I prefer." She turned to Admiral Vance. "Patricia, how fast can we get the First Fleet to Velthari space?" The Admiral thought for a moment. 72 hours if we push the engines hard." Kate nodded. Then she looked at Danny. "Get me Commander Lucas Grant. Tell him the Hell Jumpers are going to war." Danny's eyes widened slightly. The Hell Jumpers, 1st Shock Infantry Division. The most dangerous soldiers humanity had ever produced. They dropped from orbit in armored pods, crashed into enemy territory, and fought their way out. No other species did anything like it. No other species was crazy enough to try. "Are you sure about this?" Danny asked. Kate looked at the frozen image of Ambassador Voss, his face full of fear and desperation. She thought about all the times the Velthari had looked down on humanity. She thought about all the insults, all the jokes, all the dismissals. Then she thought about the billions of dead on those burning worlds. Civilians, children, people who had nothing to do with politics or pride. "I'm sure," she said. "It's time to show the galaxy what Terrans are made of." The carrier ship Defiance was the largest vessel humanity had ever built. She was 2 kilometers long, armored in layers of reinforced steel and ceramic plating, and she carried 5,000 of the deadliest soldiers in the galaxy. She was not beautiful like the Velthari crystal ships. She was not elegant or graceful. She was a weapon, pure and simple, built for one purpose: to deliver death to humanity's enemies. Commander Lucas Grant stood on the observation deck and watched the stars slide past. He was 38 years old, tall and broad, with the kind of build that came from years of hard training. His face was square and serious, marked with small scars from battles most people would never hear about. His eyes were the color of steel, and they rarely showed emotion. Lucas had been a hell jumper for 15 years. He had dropped onto 12 different worlds, fought in conditions that would kill most soldiers, and watched too many friends die. He knew what war cost. He knew it better than anyone. The door behind him opened, and Lieutenant Maria Santos walked in. She was his second in command, a woman of 35 with dark hair tied back in a practical ponytail. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen combat and survived it. In her hands, she carried 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing him one. Lucas took it and nodded his thanks. "How are the troops?" "Nervous, excited, the usual mix." Maria stood beside him and looked out at the stars. "Most of them have never fought anything except other humans. The idea of going up against an alien swarm has them wound pretty tight." "It should," Lucas said. "The Kreth aren't like anything we've faced before. They don't surrender. They don't negotiate. They don't stop. Sounds like us." Lucas almost smiled at that. Almost. 3 decks below, in a vast cargo bay that had been converted into a briefing room, 5,000 soldiers waited. They sat on metal benches or stood against the walls, all of them wearing the black and gray uniforms of the shock infantry. They were men and women from every corner of Earth, united by their willingness to do what no one else would do. Sergeant Pete Kowalski stood near the front, his thick arms crossed over his chest. He was 45 years old, built like a boulder, with a face that looked like it had been carved from stone by someone who wasn't very good at carving. He had been a hell jumper for 20 years, and he had the scars to prove it. Next to him stood Private Amy Chen. She was 19 years old, fresh from boot camp, and trying very hard not to look terrified. She had joined the military to pay for college, never expecting to end up here. Now she was about to drop onto an alien world to fight monsters from the dark between stars. "First time?" Kowalski asked, looking at her with knowing eyes. Amy nodded, not trusting her voice. "Stick close to me," the sergeant said. "Do what I do. Keep your head down and your rifle up. You'll be fine." Amy wanted to believe him. She really did. The room fell silent as Commander Grant walked onto the raised platform at the front. He didn't need to call for attention. His presence was enough. Every eye turned to him, and every voice went quiet. "You all know why we're here," Lucas began. His voice was calm and steady, filling the room without effort. "The Velthari Confederation has been fighting the Kreth swarm for 8 months. They've lost 11 worlds. Billions of civilians are dead. Their military is broken. Their hope is gone." He paused, letting the words sink in. "They asked for help. They asked us." A murmur ran through the crowd. "I know what you're thinking. The Velthari have never respected us. They've called us primitive. They've laughed at our weapons and our ways. They've treated us like children playing at the adults' table." Lucas looked out at his soldiers, meeting their eyes one by one. "None of that matters now. What matters is that innocent people are dying. Entire worlds are being consumed, and we are the only ones who can stop it." He touched a control, and a holographic image appeared behind him. It showed a creature that made Amy's stomach turn. It was 8 feet tall, insectoid, with a body covered in black armor-like plates. Its head was a nightmare of compound eyes and mandibles. Its arms ended in curved blades that looked sharp enough to cut through steel. "This is a Kreth warrior," Lucas said. "Standard infantry unit of the swarm. They're fast, they're strong, and their exoskeleton is resistant to plasma fire." He paused. "But we don't use plasma fire." He drew his sidearm, a heavy pistol that looked ancient compared to the energy weapons most species used. "We use kinetic weapons, bullets, explosives, the things the rest of the galaxy thinks are primitive and outdated." He smiled thinly. "The Kreth have never encountered projectile weapons. Their armor isn't designed to stop them. Let's show them why humanity never gave up on the old ways." A cheer went up from the soldiers, loud and fierce. Even Amy found herself caught up in it, her fear momentarily forgotten. "We drop in 12 hours, Lucas continued. "Our target is the colony world of Thessar 4. The capital city is under siege. There are civilians trapped in the urban center. Our mission is to establish a perimeter, hold it against Kreth assault, and evacuate every living being we can find." He looked at them one last time. "The galaxy thinks we're primitive. They think we're violent and dangerous and unfit for polite society." His voice hardened. "Tomorrow, we're going to prove them right. We're going to show them exactly how violent and dangerous humans can be when someone needs our help. Are you with me?" The roar that answered him shook the walls. 12 hours later, the Defiance and her sister ships dropped out of hyperspace above Thessar 4. Lucas stood in the drop bay, surrounded by his soldiers. They were sealed in their armor now, heavy suits of ceramic and metal that would protect them during the fall. Each soldier carried a rifle, a sidearm, grenades, and enough ammunition to fight a small war. Maria's voice came through his helmet radio. "Drop pods are ready! All teams report green!" Lucas looked at the soldiers around him. Some were veterans like Kowalski, calm and focused. Others were young like Amy, barely hiding their terror. All of them were about to do something insane. "Remember your training," Lucas said, his voice broadcast to every helmet. "Watch your spacing, protect each other, and when we hit the ground, we don't stop fighting until the job is done." The bay doors opened, revealing the planet below. It was beautiful from up here, green and blue, spotted with clouds. But Lucas could see the smoke rising from the cities. He could see the dark shapes of Kreth ships swarming in the atmosphere. "Hell jumpers," he said. "Let's go to work." He stepped forward and fell into the void. The drop was violent. It was always violent. Lucas felt the G-forces crushing his chest as his pod screamed through the atmosphere, friction flames turning everything orange outside his tiny window. The heat was intense despite the shielding. The noise was deafening despite the dampeners. Then the retro rockets fired, the pod slammed into the ground, and the hatch blew open. Lucas was moving before the smoke cleared, his rifle up and ready, his eyes scanning for targets. The street around him was a ruin. Buildings were burning, bodies lay in the rubble, and in the distance he could hear the clicking, chittering sound of the Kreth. Other pods were landing now, crashing down like meteors all around him. Soldiers were pouring out, forming up, checking their weapons. The sky was full of fire and falling stars. Lucas keyed his radio. "All units, this is Grant. We are on the ground. The operation has begun." The city of Varshellen had been beautiful once. The Velthari built with crystal and light, creating towers that caught the sun and scattered rainbows across the streets. Fountains sang with musical water. Gardens grew on every rooftop. 2 million people had lived here, going about their lives in peace and plenty. Now it was a graveyard. Lucas moved through the ruins with his rifle raised, stepping over rubble and bodies. The smoke was thick, making it hard to see more than a few meters ahead. The air smelled of burning and something else, something sharp and wrong that he didn't want to think about. Behind him, his squad followed in a tight formation. Sergeant Kowalski was on his right, his heavy machine gun cradled in his arms like a baby. Maria was on his left, her eyes constantly moving, watching for threats. Private Amy Chen was in the middle of the group, exactly where Kowalski had told her to stay. "Contact left," someone shouted. Lucas spun just as a Kreth warrior burst from the smoke. It was even more terrifying in person than in the hologram. All black chitin and curved blades and those horrible compound eyes that seemed to look everywhere at once. It moved fast, faster than anything that big should be able to move, its scythe arms raised to strike. Lucas fired. 3 rounds, center mass. The bullets punched through the creature's chest armor like it was paper. The Kreth stumbled, made a sound like grinding metal, and collapsed. "First confirmed kill," Maria said, her voice calm despite everything. "Kinetic weapons are effective." "Spread the word to all units," Lucas replied. "Aim for the center mass. Their armor isn't stopping our rounds." More Kreth were coming now. Lucas could hear them in the smoke, that terrible clicking sound growing louder. They emerged from the ruins in groups of 3 and 4, attracted by the gunfire. They were used to prey that ran, prey that hid, prey that died without fighting back. They were not prepared for humanity. The Helljumpers formed a firing line and opened up. The sound was deafening, a constant roar of automatic weapons that echoed off the ruined buildings. Kreth warriors fell by the dozen, their black blood pooling on the broken streets. They kept coming, and the soldiers kept shooting, and for a few minutes, it was less like a battle and more like a slaughter. But the swarm was endless. "We're running low on ammo," Kowalski reported, swapping out his magazine. "These things just keep coming." "Push forward," Lucas ordered. "We need to reach the cathedral. That's where the civilians are sheltering." They moved through the city in short rushes, one group covering while the other advanced. The Kreth attacked in waves, probing their defenses, looking for weaknesses. Every time they found a gap, soldiers died. Lucas watched 3 of his people go down in the first hour, killed by those scythe arms before anyone could react. He didn't have time to mourn. He could only keep moving, keep fighting, keep pushing toward the objective. In the cathedral at the city center, 300 Velthari civilians huddled in the darkness. The great building had been a place of worship once, its crystal walls designed to catch the light and fill the space with color. Now those walls were cracked and dark, and the only light came from small emergency lamps scattered among the refugees. A young healer named Sayla moved among them, doing what she could with the supplies she had. She was young by Velthari standards, barely 200 years old, with the silver-blue skin and 4 arms of her people. Her hands were steady as she bandaged wounds and cleaned cuts. But inside, she was terrified. The Kreth were close. Everyone could hear them, that clicking sound that never seemed to stop. They had been hunting through the city for days, finding every hiding place, killing everyone they found. It was only a matter of time before they found the cathedral. An elderly Velthari named Tovan sat near the door, watching the shadows outside. He had been a soldier once, long ago, but that was before his people had decided that war was beneath them. Now he had no weapon, no armor, nothing but his tired old body and his determination to protect the young ones. "They're coming," he said quietly. "I can see them moving in the square." Sayla looked up from her work. The fear in her heart grew colder. "How many?" "Too many." A child started crying. Her mother tried to quiet her, but the sound seemed to echo in the empty space. Outside, the clicking grew louder. Tovan stood up slowly. "I'll hold them at the door as long as I can. The rest of you find another way out. There must be tunnels, sewers, something." "There's nowhere to go," Sayla said. "The whole city is overrun." The old soldier nodded. He had known that. He had just hoped someone would prove him wrong. "Then we die here. At least we die together." The first Kreth appeared in the doorway, its compound eyes gleaming in the dim light. Tovan raised his hands, ready to fight even though he knew it was hopeless. The creature raised its scythe arms, ready to strike. The sound that followed was like nothing any of them had ever heard. A rapid series of explosions, sharp and loud, that made the crystal walls ring. The Kreth in the doorway jerked and twisted, holes appearing in its chest. It fell forward and didn't move. More explosions followed, hundreds of them, thousands, coming from everywhere at once. Tovan stumbled backward, his ears ringing, his mind unable to understand what was happening. Then, through the smoke and dust that filled the doorway, figures appeared. They were shorter than Velthari, wrapped in heavy armor that was scarred and dented. They carried strange weapons, metal things that smoked and clicked. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, but Tovan could see their eyes through the visors. Human eyes. Terran eyes. One of them stepped forward and removed his helmet. His face was covered in dirt, and something dark that might have been blood. His hair was matted with sweat. He looked exhausted, worn down, pushed to the edge of endurance. He also looked like the most beautiful thing Tovan had ever seen. "Velthari civilians?" the human asked. His voice was rough but kind. "Anyone hurt?" Sayla found her voice somehow. "We thought no one was coming. We thought we were alone." The human, Commander Lucas Grant, looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death and still hadn't given up. Behind him, more soldiers were pouring into the cathedral, setting up defensive positions, checking the wounded. "You're not alone anymore," Lucas said. "We came a long way to be here, and we're not leaving without you." A medic named Hannah Price knelt beside Sayla and started examining the wounded with quick, practiced hands. "I need more bandages," she called out. "And someone get me a stretcher for the elder in the corner." The Velthari watched in stunned silence as the humans worked. These were the primitives, the violent children of the galaxy. These were the species that everyone laughed at and looked down upon. And they had come to help. Outside, the gunfire continued. The Kreth were still attacking, still trying to reach the cathedral. But now there was something between them and the civilians, something that refused to bend or break or give up. Sayla looked at the human soldiers, saw the determination in their movements, the fierce protectiveness in the way they guarded every entrance. She had been taught all her life that the Terrans were dangerous, unstable, not to be trusted. She had never been taught that they could be heroes. Lucas walked to the door and looked out at the burning city. More Kreth were massing in the square, preparing for another assault. He checked his rifle, counted his ammunition, and keyed his radio. "All units, this is Grant. We have 300 civilians secured in the cathedral. The Kreth are preparing to assault our position. We hold this line until evacuation arrives. No one gets through. Is that understood?" The responses came back from across the city, from pockets of helljumpers holding their own positions, fighting their own battles. "Understood, sir." "Copy that. We'll hold." Lucas looked back at the Velthari huddled in the cathedral, their large eyes watching him with something that might have been hope. "You heard them," he said to his soldiers. "We hold." The battle for Varshellen lasted 19 hours. 19 hours of constant fighting, of gunfire and explosions and the screaming of the wounded. 19 hours of holding lines that should have broken, of defending positions that should have fallen, of refusing to give up when every logical calculation said the battle was lost. Lucas stood at the cathedral entrance and fired until his rifle was empty, then reloaded and fired again. The bodies of Kreth warriors piled up in the square, so many that the ones behind had to climb over them to reach the human defenders. And still they kept coming, endless waves of clicking, chittering death. "Ammunition check," he called out during a brief pause in the assault. The reports came back, and none of them were good. Most squads were down to their last few magazines. Some had already fixed bayonets, preparing for the moment when the bullets ran out. Maria appeared at his shoulder, her face pale beneath the dirt. "Lucas, we can't hold much longer. There are too many of them." "We hold until the transports arrive," he said. "That's the mission." "The transports are still 40 minutes out. We don't have 40 minutes. Lucas looked at her, and for a moment, the mask of command slipped. She could see how tired he was, how much the weight of responsibility was crushing him. But then the mask returned, and his voice was steady when he spoke. "Then we buy 40 minutes, whatever it costs." Across the city, other helljumpers were fighting the same desperate battle. In a ruined marketplace, Sergeant Kowalski led the remains of his squad against a Kreth assault that outnumbered them 50 to 1. In a collapsed parking structure, a group of wounded soldiers held the line while their medic worked frantically to save those she could. In the streets and alleys and burned-out buildings, humanity bled and died and refused to give up. Private Amy Chen crouched behind a barricade made of rubble and broken furniture. Her hands were shaking. Her rifle was almost empty. Somewhere in the smoke ahead, she could hear the Kreth gathering for another charge. She was 19 years old. She had joined the military for the college money. She had never expected to die on an alien world, fighting monsters from a nightmare. But she wasn't alone. The soldiers around her were scared too. She could see it in their eyes. And they kept fighting anyway. Because that's what helljumpers did. That's what humans did. The Kreth came again, a wave of black chitin and flashing blades. Amy raised her rifle and fired. 1 round, 2, 3. A warrior fell. Another took its place. She fired until the rifle clicked empty, then drew her sidearm and kept shooting. A scythe arm came at her from the left. She didn't have time to react, but someone else did. A soldier whose name she didn't even know, who threw himself in front of the blow and took it in his chest instead of her. He fell and Amy screamed, and she grabbed his rifle and kept fighting. The corridor behind her led to the evacuation point, where 100 civilians waited for rescue. If the Kreth got through here, those people would die. Amy planted her feet and decided that wasn't going to happen. "You want them?" she shouted at the monsters pouring toward her. "Come and get them!" She held that corridor for 11 minutes. 11 minutes of constant fighting, of reloading and firing and ducking scythe arms that came within centimeters of ending her life. 11 minutes of being absolutely terrified and refusing to let it stop her. When the reinforcements finally arrived, they found her standing in a pile of Kreth bodies, covered in black blood, her rifle still raised and ready. She was shaking so badly she could barely stand, but she was alive, and the corridor was held, and the civilians were safe. She didn't survive the next hour. A Kreth ambush caught her squad as they moved to reinforce the cathedral. The creature came out of nowhere, faster than anyone could react. Its scythe arm caught her across the chest, and she was gone before she hit the ground. She was 19 years old. She had wanted to be a teacher. Lucas learned about her death from a radio report. One name among dozens that came in that terrible day. He added her to the list he kept in his mind, the list of people who had died following his orders. Later, if he survived, he would mourn. Now he could only keep fighting. The 40 minutes passed like 40 years, but the transports finally arrived, dropping through the smoke-filled sky in waves. They were ugly ships, blocky and armored, designed to land in hot zones and get out fast. They set down in the square outside the cathedral, and the evacuation began. Sayla helped carry the wounded to the ships, working alongside human soldiers who treated her people with surprising gentleness. She watched a Terran medic, Hannah Price, stop in the middle of the chaos to comfort a crying Velthari child, speaking soft words in a language the child couldn't understand but somehow found soothing anyway. These were the primitives, Sayla thought again. These violent, dangerous creatures that her people had dismissed for centuries. They were bleeding and dying for strangers, asking nothing in return. Lucas was the last to board. He stood at the cathedral entrance as the final transport loaded, his rifle still raised, watching the smoke for any sign of movement. The Kreth were regrouping for another assault. He could feel it. They would be coming soon. "Commander," Maria called from the transport ramp. "We're loaded. Time to go." Lucas nodded but didn't move. Not yet. Not until he was sure everyone was aboard. A Kreth warrior appeared in the smoke, then another, then a dozen more. They were charging, that horrible clicking sound rising to a fever pitch. Lucas raised his rifle and started shooting, buying seconds for the transport to lift off. "Lucas!" Maria grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the ramp. "Move!" He turned and ran, firing over his shoulder as the transport's engines roared to life. He hit the ramp just as it started to close, and Maria pulled him inside as the ship lurched into the air. Through the closing door, he could see the Kreth swarming into the square below, too late to catch their prey. The battle for Varshellen was over. In the transport's cargo bay, Velthari civilians sat among wounded human soldiers. The two species looked at each other with new eyes. The barriers of prejudice and misunderstanding, built over centuries, were beginning to crack. An elderly Velthari named Tovan approached Lucas, who sat slumped against the wall with his head in his hands. The old soldier looked at the human commander, seeing for the first time not a primitive or a barbarian, but a fellow warrior who had given everything to protect strangers. "You saved us," Tovan said simply. "Why?" Lucas looked up. He was exhausted beyond words, his eyes red, his face lined with grief for all the soldiers he had lost. But his voice was steady when he answered. "Because it was the right thing to do." Tovan was silent for a long moment. Then he did something no Velthari had ever done to a human before. He placed his hand over his heart and bowed his head, a gesture of deep respect reserved for the most honored warriors. "Then you are better than we knew," he said, "and we are in your debt." Lucas wanted to say something meaningful, something that would bridge the gap between their peoples, but he was too tired, and there were too many names on the list in his mind. So he just nodded and closed his eyes, letting the vibration of the transport carry him away from the burning city below. Behind them, Varshellen continued to burn. But 300 Velthari civilians were alive who shouldn't have been, and across the galaxy, word was beginning to spread about what the humans had done. The Terrans had come, and they had refused to lose. The war against the Kreth lasted another 18 months. It was brutal and costly, fought across a dozen worlds and 100 battlefields. The Hell Jumpers dropped again and again, each time facing impossible odds, each time refusing to break. They lost thousands of soldiers. They saved millions of lives. Lucas Grant led from the front until a piece of shrapnel took his leg on the fourth drop. They fitted him with a prosthetic, and he was back in command within a month. Maria Santos was promoted to lead her own battalion after the Battle of Velnar Prime, where she held a bridge against Kreth forces for 3 days with less than 200 soldiers. Pete Kowalski earned enough medals to fill a wall, and when asked about them, he just shrugged and said he was doing his job. The tide turned slowly, then all at once. The Kreth had never faced an enemy that adapted to them, that learned from each battle and came back stronger. They had never faced an enemy that refused to give up no matter how high the cost. In the final assault on the Kreth homeworld, human and Velthari ships fought side by side for the first time, their weapons combining to crack open the swarm's last defenses. When it was over, when the Kreth retreated into the dark spaces between stars to lick their wounds for another 8 centuries, the galaxy was different. Something had changed in the way the other species looked at humanity. Ambassador Thyron Voss stood before the Galactic Assembly once more. The Great Hall was full, every seat taken, every eye watching him. But this time, his voice did not tremble. This time he stood tall and proud, his 4 arms spread wide in a gesture of welcome. "2 years ago I stood in this chamber and begged for help," he said. "I was desperate. My people were dying. Our great civilization, which had stood for 3,000 years, was on the edge of extinction." He paused, letting the memory wash over the assembly. "I asked the younger races for aid. Many refused. Some laughed. They said it was not their fight. They said the Velthari had been arrogant, and now we were paying the price for our pride." His eyes moved to the Terran section, where Grace Porter sat with her small delegation. The humans did not laugh. They did not refuse. They did not ask what we could offer in return. They simply came. The holographic display behind him flickered to life. It showed footage from the war, images that had spread across every corner of the galaxy. Human soldiers pulling Velthari children from rubble, medics treating wounds under enemy fire, drop pods falling through burning skies like a rain of stars, and again, images of Terran troops walking out of smoke and fire, their weapons raised, their faces set with determination, refusing to stop until the job was done. "We called them primitive," Thyron continued. "We mocked their weapons, their emotions, their stubborn refusal to evolve beyond violence." He shook his head slowly. We were wrong. So terribly wrong. He turned to face the Terran delegation directly. The humans showed us what we had forgotten in our 3,000 years of civilization. They showed us that strength is not just about technology or power. It is about heart. It is about the willingness to fight for others, to bleed for strangers, to die for people you have never met and will never know. Grace Porter listened with tears in her eyes. She thought about all the soldiers who had given their lives. She thought about Amy Chen, 19 years old, who had held a corridor alone so that civilians could escape. She thought about all the names that would never be forgotten. The humans came when no one else would, Theron said. They bled for us, they died for us, and they asked for nothing in return. He placed his hand over his heart in the Velthari gesture of deepest respect. We will not forget. My people will never forget. The applause started slowly, scattered claps from a few delegations. Then it grew, spreading across the chamber like a wave until the entire assembly was on its feet. Species that had ignored humanity for centuries were now cheering for them. The galaxy was finally seeing what the Terrans were made of. Far from the political ceremonies and grand speeches, in a quiet refugee camp on the Velthari homeworld, a different kind of remembrance was taking place. Sayla had built a small school for the children who had survived Varshellen. It was nothing fancy, just a tent with some chairs and a holographic display, but it was enough. Every day she taught them history and science and mathematics. But sometimes, when the lessons were done, she taught them something else. Today, she told the children gathered before her, I want to teach you a new word. It is not a Velthari word. It is a human word, a Terran word. The children leaned forward, curious. They had all seen the humans during the war, the strange beings in heavy armor who had fought so hard to protect them. They had heard stories about their bravery, their kindness, their stubborn refusal to give up. The word is hope, Sayla said. It means believing that good things can happen, even when everything seems dark. Even when you are afraid, even when it seems like there is no way forward. A young child raised her hand. Is that what the humans have? Hope? Sayla smiled. Yes, I think that is exactly what they have. And I think that is why they came to help us, even when everyone else said no. Because they believed they could make a difference. Because they hoped. The children repeated the word quietly, rolling it around on their tongues, learning its shape. It was a strange word, harsh and short compared to the flowing syllables of the Velthari language. But there was something powerful in it, something that felt right. On the other side of the galaxy, the carrier ship Defiance orbited a newly liberated world. The scars of battle were still visible on her hull, patches of fresh metal covering the wounds she had taken in 18 months of fighting. But she was still flying. She was still carrying her soldiers forward. Lucas stood on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. His new leg ached sometimes, a phantom pain that the doctors said would fade with time. He wasn't sure he wanted it to. The pain reminded him of what they had lost, what they had gained. Maria found him there, as she always did. She carried 2 cups of coffee, as she always did. Some things never changed. Big day tomorrow, she said, handing him a cup. High Command wants us to drop on Thessar 6. The Kreth are making one last push, and the Velthari are requesting our assistance. Requesting, Lucas repeated. Not begging this time. No, not begging. Maria smiled. Funny how that changed. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, more battles waited, more impossible odds, more chances to prove what humanity was made of. Do you think they'll remember us? Maria asked finally. 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now. Do you think the galaxy will remember what we did? Lucas thought about the question. He thought about Amy Chen, who had been afraid but fought anyway. He thought about all the soldiers who had given everything so that strangers could live. He thought about the Velthari children learning a human word, carrying it forward into the future. "They'll remember," he said quietly, "because we'll still be here, still fighting, still showing up when no one else will." The Defiance turned toward the darkness, her engines glowing blue against the black. Inside her armored hull, 5,000 new Helljumpers prepared for their first drop, trained by the veterans of the Kreth War, carrying on the legacy of those who came before. Lucas finished his coffee and straightened his uniform. There was work to be done. There was always work to be done. "Let's go," he said to Maria. "We have people to save." They walked back into the ship together, leaving the stars behind. But the stars would be there when they returned. The stars were always there, waiting and watching, bearing witness to the small creatures who dared to challenge the darkness. And somewhere in the galaxy, in refugee camps and rebuilt cities and quiet schoolrooms, children of a dozen species whispered a new word to each other. A human word, a Terran word, hope. The galaxy had learned something important about humanity. They had learned that when all seemed lost, when darkness covered everything, when every other species looked away and said it was not their problem, the humans would come. They would walk out of the smoke, guns blazing, hearts burning, refusing to stop until the job was done, and they would never, ever give up.